Hi, thanks for joining. Before we get started, please make sure that you have subscribed, are leaving those 5-star ratings, liking what we're putting out there, either here on the podcast, on YouTube, or in any of the other publications, either on Substack or the quick takes on Instagram and on Threads. So I was passed along a not so funny comedian's take on mental health issues. And I will play some of the clips as we go through here. But it raises another point that was previously discussed when we went through and talked about the Tony Robbins issues in terms of, all you got to do is just feel happy. If you want to be mentally healthy, if you want to get rid of depression, all you got to do is feel happy. And it goes into the myths and misconceptions and misunderstandings about what mental health issues are and how we go about dealing with mental health issues. And so let's go ahead and let's talk about mental health issues, basically delving into the myths and misconceptions that were presented to us by a not so funny comedian by the name of Bill Maher. Mental health issues, an epidemic issue or something made up? So let's talk about that.
Warning. The following presentation contains information that might contradict what you have previously heard, or believed to be true, about how the human body works, and contains material that is not suitable for closed-minded individuals. Enjoy.
So let's go ahead and let's listen to what the person Bill Maher has to say about the mental health issues based off of his, I guess they call it New Rules take from his television show, Real Time with Bill Maher. And then we'll come back and we'll discuss each of those points and hopefully come away with a better understanding of the issues that he's trying to make light of, trying to make fun of, as if they're not real health issues. So here we go with the clips and the takes. And this is from Bill Maher, Real Time with Bill Maher. And this would be on Friday, the 15th of March, 2024 was the clip that I was forwarded.
And finally, new rule, being obsessed with your mental health is bad for your mental health. I've been thinking a lot lately about a puzzle many are struggling with. Why are Biden's approval ratings so low when things are generally pretty good? Now, of course, there are problems. America's a big place, but wages are rising, unemployment is negligible, the stock market is soaring.
He then lists off a host of economic things as if being able to buy things, as if being able to have things is the measure by which we should be measuring happiness.
Cheer the fuck up. Stop acting like life in America in 2024 is unbearable. Biden's ratings are in the toilet, not because he's doing such a bad job, but because a lot of Americans like to live with their head in the toilet.
Of the biggest issues that we have to deal with when we start looking at mental health issues, and with most of the cognitive issues or brain issues that we tend to look at when we look at health, when we look at healthcare issues, is the fact that it's hidden. It's something that we cannot actually see. It's something that we tend to put off because we don't see it. It's something that for the longest period of time, we've made fun of. We've joked about. We've made light of the fact that people have dementia issues and we make fun of it. Oh, they're just getting forgetful. Or we make fun of the attention deficit issues by making fun of or looking at the student that can't sit still, or the fact that attention spans have shrunk because of the way in which people are consuming media makes it feel like, oh, everybody's got attention deficit issues. But what we have to remember is that these are actual true medical issues. These are things that are diagnosed by medical professionals. These are things that have distinct differential diagnostic criteria that have to be met in order to actually be a real issue, a real medical issue. There are some stats that will be presented here.
Let's look at the numbers. Almost a third of American adults have reported a depression diagnosis at some point in their life. And while depression is, of course, a very real thing, it's also true that earlier generations never suffered from the expectation that you're supposed to feel good all the time. 1 in 8 adults are on antidepressants, and that doesn't include the ones who steal them from their kids.
And this is where he's wrong. This is where he gets his, I guess, kicks out of making fun of the mental health issues. It's not that we have to become tougher, or it's not that we're not as tough as we have been in the past. It's a social change. As a society, we have become more accepting of mental health issues within diagnosing. And because we've been more accepting of mental health issues within diagnosing, we have become more open to seeing mental health issues being diagnosed.
And the kids? The newest TikTok challenge is self-diagnosis of mental problems. Because what's more of a hotbed of mental health than TikTok? In 2022, the CDC released the results of a survey on teen mental health, and over 40% said they feel persistently sad or hopeless. And antidepressant use among young males is rapidly rising.
2 points need to be addressed here. Point one, it's not surprising that we would have self-diagnosing taking place. Self-diagnosing is one of the major problems across all healthcare. With the rapid rise of information and information availability, there is a subsequent rise in self-diagnosis, self-treatment, and self-medication, something that Mr. Maher does with his use of legal marijuana. The points relating to the sense of anxiety and depression amongst teenagers we'll get to here in a little bit, but a lot of it has to do with the amount of stress that we place on teenagers, or the self-imposed level of stresses that teenagers place upon themselves, or the inappropriate ideals that teenagers have, particularly with the rapid influx of social media and the need to present some level of ideal of perfection that cannot be met, but yet we still have it imposed upon them.
Now, without a doubt, antidepressants can be life-saving for those who need them, but here's the thing. About 3/4 of Americans who are on them haven't been diagnosed with depression at all. They just want a magic pill. We spend $6 billion a year on drug ads, all featuring someone emerging from darkness to play with a dog. Calling Dr. TikTok. But every bad feeling isn't a disease, and Americans really need to stop pathologizing everything. No one's just sad anymore. They're clinically depressed. They don't merely worry, they have chronic anxiety. Do you like things neat and organized? That's OCD. You're bummed when it's cold out? Seasonal depression. Hate being alone? Separation anxiety. Bored? That's ADHD. Shy? Social anxiety disorder. Why? Because you don't want to go to the office party? Nobody does. Are you moody? No, you're bipolar. And some people are bipolar. And some people are on the spectrum. But sometimes on the spectrum is just a hall pass for being a jerk. And it's not noble to glom onto the soft end of it. PTSD is for people who fought in Iraq, not for people who want to bring their dog on a plane.
The advertisements that are being presented as the means and modes of treatment is astounding. In order to have effective treatments for depression, anxiety, or other mental health issues, it's a combination of lifestyle interventions, behavioral modification, and in some cases, pharmacological treatments. Yes, people abuse medications. You have stated that you abuse medications, even though you won't admit to the fact that you abuse medications based off of the amount of THC that you have consumed. THC is a medication, even though you don't want to see it as a medication. When we treat health issues as real issues in a holistic manner that combines pharmacological, behavioral, and lifestyle modifications, we can correct thinking and we can treat the person and the disease. Mental health issues are a disease, whether you want to admit it or not. I'm not going to play the rest of the clip. I will have points to what is being stated as we go on in discussing the mental health issues and the fact that we need to be aware of mental health issues. We'll jump back to a few points that were being covered without playing them in their entirety. And we'll start by looking at the attention deficit issue, and we'll look at it slightly different than how it was originally approached to me professionally in terms of the attention deficit issue. The attention deficit issue nowadays is about, as was joked, boredom or low attention or lack of attention span. But that's not how it was originally introduced, at least the way in which I was originally introduced into the attention deficit issue. And that goes beyond the stigmatism of attention deficit issues, and particularly the hyperactive attention deficit issue. When I first started teaching, there was what looked like an epidemic of attention deficit issues coming out. And a lot of people would say, oh, it's teachers diagnosing attention deficit issues. It's school districts diagnosing attention deficit issues, because students who get diagnosed with attention deficit issues get placed into special education. And when they get placed into special education, there's more funding available for the school district based off of the population of attention deficit students, or students needing special educational accommodations because of attention deficit issues. But that's not the case. That is not what we actually see when we start looking at the epidemiology. We start looking at the diagnostic criteria that are out there, the work of the educational psychologists, the work of the behavioral analysis that are working in the schools, the work of the special education instructors, special education teachers. It's not where we are seeing this rush of wanting to diagnose students with attention deficit issues. There are a host of reasons for the rise that we see in attention deficit issues. Beyond just the more openness to the issues that we might see, the health issues, the mental health issues, there are noticeable changes that we see in genetic and epigenetic regulation based off of environmental and nutritional signals that impact the way in which areas within the brain are going to be regulating behavioral outflow. And that behavioral outflow leading to attention deficit issues is not just being bored. It's not just having the need to move. It's not the fact that, oh, we're making little boys sit when they shouldn't be sitting, and all of the other tropes, all of the other myths and misconceptions about attention deficit issues. There is a growing population that we see with attention deficit issues that stem from the openness that we have to have the diagnosis, the openness to see the issues around attention deficit hyperactivity disorders, the fact that we understand the causes and we are more cognizant of the differences that we see in attention deficit hyperactivity disorders between the different social genders, boys and girls, males, females, as well as understanding that it's not something that you grow out of. It's something that you learn how to control through behavioral modifications, through the use of exercise, through the use of medications that allow for compensatory activities, allow for accommodations to take place within the classroom, that allow for the student to thrive, that we would not have if we still had the same social stigma that appears to be presented within the commentary that is left to be perceived as a joke, which doesn't seem to be a joke, even with the laugh track that is accompanying the lines. And it's not just with the attention deficit issues. We have other issues that were raised that relates to medications, as if the medications is something new, as if off-label use of medication is something that is only around with the mental health issues. Even though we talked about the THC, there's others that are out there. Ozempic is a type 2 diabetes medicine, but is being prescribed for weight loss issues, which is a secondary effect of that medicine when used in combination of reduction of nutrient load and increase in physical activity, where there is a slightly greater than total amount of body weight loss, and in particular fat mass loss, with people taking Ozempic versus people who are not taking Ozempic if they happen to be type 2 diabetes. There is no research that says take this for weight loss. It's being prescribed off label. And we see some people who are taking mental health medications off label that are self-medicating. There is a noticeable rise in the percentage of population that has been diagnosed with mental health issues. And while, yes, it's because we are more open to having these diagnoses, but there's something else that comes into play. And it's something else that comes into play because of some of the underlying physiology, some of the underlying psychology that comes about that leads to a lot of the depression issues, a lot of the attention deficit issues, a lot of the anxiety issues that we have to worry about when we start looking at mental health issues. And so when we start having people dismiss the mental health issues, make fun of the mental health issues, make light of the mental health issues, what they're doing is that they're trying to closet the issues without understanding that having these issues out in the open allows us to have discussions about them, allows us to further understanding of what we can do within social settings. Because when we start looking at a lot of these mental health issues, we start looking at depression, anxiety, attention deficit issues, seasonal affect disorders. While some of them have to deal with environmental cueing, such as seasonal affect disorder, a lot of it has to do with what's referred to as the biopsychosocial effects of health. That is, how does my biology, how does my psychology, how does the sociology that I find myself in come into play when I start to look at my overall level of healthiness? And one aspect of healthiness is my psychological health. And so when we start making fun of or start pointing out that, oh, there's this rise in mental health issues. Well, there's a reason for the rise in mental health issues. A lot of the mental health issues that we look at, particularly if we start saying, oh, they're on the rise, depression, anxiety, attention deficit issues. Part of it has to deal with nutrition and environmental cueing that cause some disruption within neurotransmitters, which we'll get to as we go through the discussion here. But a lot of it has to deal with cognitive load and cognitive stress that we place on ourselves based off of what we think society wants from us. And when we have dismissiveness to this cognitive overload that somehow I have to be perfect, because that's what I see in all of my social interactions. Because all of my social interactions have some sort of digital component to it nowadays, where we're able to edit what people can see, where we're able to change the perspective, where we're able to change the perception, where we're able to change how I present myself to the world. And when I'm unable to cope with that change, that ability to understand what is real versus what is not real, when I'm unable to see that people are not perfect, where I have placed, particularly for students, undue stress on myself in order to be perfect, because for some unknown reason, we have gone away from education for learning to education for testing, where my whole entire self-worth as a student is not whether or not I can learn anything, but whether or not I can pass a test, where I have this undue stress placed on me in order to be perfect on some arbitrary measure of factual recall, as opposed to, can I actually critical thinking? Can I actually make connections? Can I actually interact with the content, with the information, to make it my own, to make it so that I'm able to explain what's going on, where I'm able to communicate ideas? But we've gone away from that in education, particularly in the United States, where education is about rote memorization, where as an educator, you're not training people to think for themselves, but you're training people to take tests and pass tests, but not just pass tests, ace the test, because that is what the self-worth of the student, what the self-worth of the teacher, what the self-worth of the administrator, what the self-worth of the school district happens to come from. It comes from, did you ace the test? And because we have this undue stress, it's not so out of whack to think that there's increasing anxiety around tests, because I'm placing all of my self-worth into getting 100% on a test without understanding that learning is about making mistakes, where learning is about failure. There's a line where the true measure of failure is whether or not you're willing to get up off the canvas, where you're unwilling to try again. Granted, we have to make sure that we're making changes and adaptations each time we try something, where we're not doing the same exact thing again and again and again. But when we overweight certain measures as the end-all be-all of the self-worth of somebody, it's not a stretch of the imagination to think that they're going to place too much value on that one thing. And when I place too much value on that one thing, it's going to cause undue stress. And when I have undue stress, I get a change in the way in which my neurons are functioning. And when I get a change in the way in which my neurons are functioning, I can have outward signs of anxiety. I can have inward signs of anxiety. It's something that we have come to accept as it relates to certain aspects of health. It's one of the reasons why for the last decade or so, we've been trying to use the body positivity movement in order to reduce the undue stress and undue pressure, particularly on women within society, as it relates to their body image. That is an attempt to reduce the anxiety around body image in an attempt to reduce the incidence and prevalence of eating disorders. But at the same time, we're not doing that when we start looking at mental health issues outside of eating disorders. We're not looking at how are we presenting issues? How are we talking about issues? Why is it that we see elevated levels of depression during periods of low sunlight? Well, that's because there is an impact on environmental amounts of sunlight as relates to signaling of serotonin and dopamine and glutamate and GABA and a host of other neurotransmitters that impact the way in which my limbic system functions, that impacts the way in which my amygdala functions, that impacts the way in which my hippocampus functions, that impacts the way in which my endocrine system is going to function based off of how the hypothalamus is sending signals to the pituitary. Within the stress responses, within what's referred to as the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, that elevates my stress response. And by elevating my stress response, I become more susceptible to depression issues. Things that I can affect by changing how much exposure to sunlight I get, which is why when we have low sunlight, we have increased risk for seasonal affect disorders, which is why when we have too much sunlight, we can have a secondary type of seasonal affect disorder. However, this is not the seasonal affect disorder that's going to come about from stress from not having enough sunlight, but from too much exposure to blue light, which is going to lead to sleep deprivation. And sleep deprivation will have very similar issues in terms of neurotransmitter impacts to stress hormone impacts that lead to issues surrounding depression and anxiety. We have to treat depression and anxiety as real things. Depression and anxiety is not just I'm worried about something or I'm feeling sad. These are manifestations, physiological manifestations of excessive stress, physiological manifestations of neurotransmitter disruptions due to excessive stress. The problem with stress is that we cannot differentiate between internal stress and external stress. Stress is simply felt as stress. And when I have an excessive amount of cognitive load being placed on me, that excessive amount of cognitive load being placed on me is going to trigger something very similar in terms of stress response as if I am in actual physiological or physical harm. And the problem is that when people make light of that situation, they make light of how the human body actually works, and it makes somebody feel less than And when they feel less than, they're less likely to seek treatment. And when they're less likely to seek treatment, they're more likely to not only harm themselves, but harm others around them. This is not technically physical harm or lashing out in some sort of violence towards others that I'm talking about when I say harming themselves or harming others. It can be, but that's not the end result of what we're looking at here. When we're talking about harming ourselves or harming others, what we're really talking about is the continuance of psychological damage, the continuance of this cognitive load, this cognitive stress that is increasing the stress load, the HPA outflow that's causing an increase in inflammation, that's causing a change in my neurotransmitter functions, that's changing the way in which my brain is working, that leads to additional stress and additional anxiety and additional depression that can manifest itself in harm. And that's where we have to be cognizant of what we do around people when we start noticing some of the outward signs and outward symptoms of depression. This is where needing to be aware of mental health, needing to be cognizant that mental health is a real issue. Be willing to take mental health days when you need mental health days. Take a break. Take a break. We don't have to do everything all of the time. There is this kind of notion that, oh, all we got to do is work through it and we can solve the problem. But sometimes in order to solve the problem, you have to take a step back and you have to look at the problem outside of the problem. If you're constantly trying to fill the hole while digging the hole, you're going to get stuck in the hole. You have to take a step back and you have to be able to analyze the problem. There was a line in the Bill Maher clip that made fun of the Elmo's Twitter, looking to see how everybody's doing. Doing a check-in, seeing how people are doing. It's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of caring. It's a sign of indicating that you are part of the society, a part of a social network that says, hey, I'm out here. Is everybody else out here? I'm doing okay. Are you doing okay? Or, hey, I'm struggling. Is anybody else struggling? Is there anybody there that's willing to help me? Is there anybody there that I can offer my help to? One of the things that I tell students all the time whenever I'm meeting with them, either as a group or one-on-one, is let me know if there's anything I can do for you. If you're unwilling to share the struggles that you're facing, don't be surprised when people aren't able to help you out. If you have been let down by people, share that. Let them know. The idea that mental health is something that we have to struggle alone is something that is old. It's something that is a misconception. It's something that is disinformation. You are not weak if you happen to have a mental health issue. You're not weak if you happen to need some help cognitively. You're not weak if you need some help physically. We're social organisms. We're social beings. We need community. Why is it that teenagers have the rise of anxiety, the rise of depression that was quoted earlier? The 40+%, indicating a feeling of depression or anxiety. It's because they're isolated. Well, you think, oh, well, they're constantly around their friends, but they're not. They're stuck in their devices. They're unable to see reality as reality. They're stuck in a device that has an altered perception as to what is real. There was an uproar recently about schools trying to get students to put phones away. But if I'm able to remove myself from that artificial environment to be communal in a real environment, to have true social interactions. I will have better, or I can have better social cues. I can have better environmental cues. I can have correct developmental processes that allow me to grow the way in which I need to grow in order to become a better person, to mature correctly, to learn how to problem solve correctly, to learn how to communicate through my issues as opposed to communicate about my issues, to lambast people who might have a different opinion than I do because I don't know how to communicate with people who have different opinions than I do, to make fun of individuals who might be different than me as opposed to talk to people who might be different than me. The more isolated I become, the more likely I am to have a lot of the mental health issues because I do not have the social interactions that I need to be a complete person. We've talked a lot recently as relates to health changes. And by we, I mean the people who I'm writing research papers with. And the movement within healthcare towards a holistic approach where we look at the patient as a person and involve that person within the treatment plan to become self-selected, self-monitored within the treatment as opposed to authoritarian, coercive within the treatment. The more we have social interactions with each other, the better we will be in terms of our overall mental health. To laugh off mental health as something that is not real, to make fun of the growing number of people who express feelings of depression as something they should just get over because the economy is doing well, or because I am doing well in my own world, misplaces what is at issue. Just because I'm doing okay doesn't mean someone else is doing okay. Just because I'm able to afford something doesn't mean someone else is able to afford something. We want to talk about wealth. We want to talk about growth. We want to talk about being better than we were, particularly when we start looking at the political stuff over the next year. We're in a presidential year with 2024 elections, and the negativity that we see within the news cycle has an impact on our perspective, both external and internal. The more negative views that we get placed upon us, the more likely I am to have a negative view because I'm unable to see any positivity that's out there. As I used to tell students all the time, positive mental attitude will carry you a long way in life. Because if I have a positive mental attitude, I can see the light at the end of the tunnel, even if the tunnel happens to be an upward struggle climb. Because I have the correct mental perspective to take to the task at hand. It doesn't dismiss any type of mental health issue. It doesn't denigrate people who have mental health issues. If we simply look at mental health issues as being true health issues, the same way that we look at broken bones, the same way we look at heart disease, the same way we look at cancer, the people with mental health issues will get the treatments that they need and the support that they need. To laugh them off the way in which Mr. Maher did is appalling. And he should be called to task on it. And not just Mr. Maher, but all of the other talking figures, talking heads, people who have audiences that make light of mental health issues or make it some sort of easy fix where all you got to do is be happy or smile more. Demonstrates a lack of understanding of the issues and an unwillingness to learn about the issues. Well, thanks for listening. Hopefully got a little bit out of this. And once again, we had a different discussion on a very similar topic, looking at Tony Robbins and his perspective on the issues surrounding depression and some of the mental health issues. And we've discussed some of the ways in which we can look at mental health issues and approach mental health issues in the classroom, in the school. And I hope that you would listen to those as well. I've placed links in the notes for this episode for those of you that might need assistance as relates to your own mental health. Please do not be afraid to reach out to others if you need help, either for mental health or physical. Make sure you're leaving those 5-star ratings. We very much appreciate it. Make sure you're sharing these out with everybody that you have contact with. Once again, we appreciate that. It's going to help out with the algorithms. Give us a big thumbs up and like what's getting published, both here on the podcast as well as in YouTube, on Substack, and then the quick takes that are getting put out onto Instagram and then into Threads.